There are moments in a nation's journey that feel different from the rest.
India has done it.
India has made space history.
A moment of history for the country.
That feeling has a name. It is called pride. And in 2026, many Indians have been feeling it. Not just once, not just twice, but again and again. Across continents, across negotiations, across history being made on stages that the world is watching. Something bigger is happening. And to understand it, you have to understand the man at the center of it. And the strategy that many are now calling one of the most ambitious diplomatic campaigns in India's modern history. This is the story of why Narendra Modi is being called Mr. International, and more importantly, what India has actually gained because of it. For years, a familiar criticism followed Narendra Modi's foreign visits. Why does he travel so much? The expense, the optics, the pageantry, the question of whether these grand trips were substance or spectacle. It was a fair debate in its time. Diplomacy is slow. Its results rarely arrive the week after the handshake. There are no instant headlines that say, Country X is now energy secure because of a meeting 3 years ago. The dots only connect in hindsight. But 2026 has been a year where a lot of those dots have started connecting. And when you look at the outcomes of just the last few months, not as individual events, but as part of a larger pattern, a very clear picture begins to emerge. India is no longer just growing. India is being trusted, courted, and welcomed as a strategic partner by some of the most powerful and advanced nations on Earth. And the architecture of that trust was built, visit by visit, relationship by relationship, over more than a decade. The critics asked, what does India get from these foreign visits? Here is the answer. Between May 15th and May 20th, 2026, Prime Minister Narendra Modi embarked on what has become one of the most talked about diplomatic tours in recent memory. A 6-day, 5-nation sprint across the UAE, the Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, and Italy. 5 countries, 6 days, and outcomes that will be felt for years. Let us walk through each stop one by one. Stop 1. The United Arab Emirates. Modi's first stop was Abu Dhabi on May 15th. The timing could not have been more significant. The world in mid-2026 is not a calm place. The U.S.-Israeli conflict with Iran has disrupted global energy markets. The Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 20% of the world's oil flows, has faced closure. India, which imports nearly 90% of its crude oil requirements, has been directly affected. LPG supplies, a fuel used by hundreds of millions of Indian households, have been squeezed because nearly 90% of India's LPG imports normally pass through that key waterway. What India secured during the visit was substantial. The UAE visit lasted only a few hours, but what it produced was not small at all. It produced energy security, investment commitments, and a defense framework, all at a time when India needed them most. First, a memorandum of understanding was signed between the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, known as ADNOC, and India's Strategic Petroleum Reserves Limited. The agreement opens the door for ADNOC to store up to 30 million barrels of crude oil in India's Strategic Petroleum Reserves at facilities in Visakhapatnam, Andhra Pradesh, and a new site being developed in Chandakol, Odisha. The MOU also includes the possibility of crude storage in Fujairah, UAE, a facility that can bypass the Strait of Hormuz entirely, making it a critical buffer for India in times of crisis. For context, an earlier 2018 agreement had ADNOC storing around 6 million barrels in India. The new arrangement is 5 times larger. Second, Indian Oil Corporation and ADNOC signed a separate strategic collaboration agreement covering LPG, the cooking gas used by hundreds of millions of Indian families. ADNOC is already India's largest single source of LPG, supplying close to 40% of the country's total demand. The new agreement opens the path for a long-term sale and purchase arrangement between ADNOC Gas Limited and Indian Oil Corporation, providing India with more stable, predictable LPG supply even during periods of global disruption. Third, India secured a $5 billion investment commitment. The Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, one of the world's largest sovereign wealth funds, and India's National Infrastructure and Investment Fund, agreed to explore investments in Indian infrastructure and financial institutions. That is not charity. That is global capital voting with confidence in India's growth story. Fourth, and notably, the two sides finalized a framework for a strategic defense partnership. The framework covers defense industrial collaboration, innovation, advanced technology, joint military training, maritime security, cyber defense, and secure communications. In a world where regional instability is rising and India is expanding its defense self-reliance, having the UAE as a structured defense partner is significant. Stop 2. The Netherlands. From Abu Dhabi, Modi flew to The Hague in the Netherlands. The May 16th visit produced 17 bilateral agreements covering areas that include migration and mobility, green hydrogen, defense cooperation, and technology. The Netherlands, a country with one of the world's most advanced port, logistics, and water management sectors, is increasingly being seen as a key European gateway for India. Dutch business leaders met Modi at a CEO roundtable, praising the opportunities in semiconductors, their infrastructure, and trade. Boudewijn Siemens, a prominent Dutch business figure, highlighted Modi's vision for India's economic growth and the potential for deeper economic ties. The India-EU Free Trade Agreement, recently concluded, adds further momentum. It means that India's partnerships with European nations like the Netherlands are now backed by a larger trade architecture. But beyond agreements and trade, the Netherlands visit produced one moment that went beyond economics entirely. The Netherlands returned the ancient Chola Copper Plates to India. Let that sit for a moment. These are 11th century artifacts, 21 copper plates. Together, they weigh around 30 kilograms. They are bound by a bronze ring bearing the royal seal of Rajendra Chola I, one of the greatest kings in Indian history. The inscriptions are in both Sanskrit and Tamil. They record the genealogy of the Chola dynasty, the land grants made by Rajaraja Chola I, and the story of a civilization that once controlled much of South India and projected its power as far as Southeast Asia. These plates arrived in the Netherlands around the year 1700, taken by a Christian missionary named Florentius Camper, when the city of Nagapattinam in present-day Tamil Nadu was under Dutch colonial control. For more than 300 years, they sat at Leiden University. On May 16, 2026, they came home. The return was backed by a UNESCO-supported agreement between India and the Netherlands. Prime Minister Modi and Dutch Prime Minister Rob Jetten presided over the formal handover ceremony. Addressing the event, Modi said it was a joyous moment for every Indian. It was not just a gesture. It was India asserting, with quiet confidence, that its civilizational heritage belongs to India, and that the world now listens when India asks. In the last decade, more than 1,400 antiquities have been repatriated to India from various countries, including the United States, Australia, Canada, and now the Netherlands. The pace of returns has accelerated in recent years. In 2024, the United States returned 297 antiquities in a single batch, one of the largest restitutions in history. In early 2026, the Smithsonian Institution returned 3 important temple bronzes from Tamil Nadu. Stop 3, Sweden. Modi's third stop was Gothenburg, Sweden, on May 17th and 18th. Sweden is not the first name that comes to mind when people think of India's diplomatic priorities, but this visit showed why it should be. India and Sweden elevated their bilateral relationship to a full strategic partnership. The two leaders, Modi and Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson, adopted the India-Sweden Joint Action Plan 2026 to 2030. The Ministry of External Affairs listed 6 major outcomes from the visit. The India-Sweden Joint Innovation Partnership 2.0 was launched, establishing a virtual India-Sweden Joint Science and Technology Center. The partnership focuses on emerging technologies including artificial intelligence, 6G communications, quantum computing, sustainable mining, critical minerals, space, and life sciences. An India-Sweden Technology and Artificial Intelligence Corridor was also announced, a direct collaboration pathway between India's talent ecosystem and Sweden's innovation companies. The two leaders also set an ambitious goal to double bilateral trade within the next 5 years. Swedish companies were specifically invited to participate in India's growth story across sectors including clean technologies, advanced manufacturing, sustainable mobility, and digital transformation. Defense cooperation was also on the table. Sweden is home to some of the world's most advanced defense manufacturers. Access to Swedish capability in areas from aerospace to naval systems fits directly into India's broader strategy of building a self-reliant, globally competitive defense sector. Modi was also conferred with the Royal Order of the Polar Star Commander Grand Cross by Sweden, one of the country's highest honors. Crown Princess Victoria joined the meeting and conveyed warm greetings from King Carl XVI, Gustav, and Queen Sylvia. A sign that this was not a routine diplomatic visit, but a moment of genuine elevation in the relationship between two democracies. Stop 4. Norway. From Sweden, Modi flew to Oslo. May 18, 2026 marks something that had not happened in 43 years. An Indian Prime Minister visiting Norway. The last time an Indian Prime Minister had made a standalone bilateral visit to Norway was more than 4 decades ago. The significance of that gap and the significance of its end was not lost on either side. Norway's ambassador described the visit as historic. Modi's Norway program includes bilateral talks with Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre, a meeting with King Harald V and Queen Sonja, an address at the India-Norway Business and Research Summit, and, critically, the third India-Nordic Summit on May 19. The India-Nordic Summit brings together the leaders of Norway, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, and Sweden alongside India. It is the only format where India meets all 5 Nordic nations together. The first such summit was held in Stockholm in 2018. The second was in Copenhagen in 2022. Now in Oslo in 2026, it reflects a deepening strategic architecture between India and one of the world's most innovation-driven, sustainability-focused regions. The Norway bilateral agenda covers clean technologies, the blue economy, which includes oceans, fisheries, maritime trade, and underwater resources, trade, investment, maritime cooperation, and Arctic-linked strategic thinking. The India-EFTA Trade and Economic Partnership Agreement, which entered into force in October 2025, provides the legal backbone for this deepening engagement. It was India's first free trade deal with a group of developed European economies. Norway's relevance to India goes deeper than trade. Norway has some of the world's most advanced offshore energy technology, tunneling expertise, and maritime systems. Norwegian tunneling companies are already deployed in India's ambitious Char Dham railway project in the Himalayas. India's Himadri research station in the Arctic has hosted more than 400 Indian scientists since 2008. ISRO antennas at Norway's Svalbard archipelago became operational in 2026, enhancing India's polar satellite data capabilities. Stop 5. Italy. The fifth and final stop is Italy. Italy's importance to India has grown steadily as both countries have deepened their engagement within the broader India-Europe partnership. The visit fits into a larger India-EU reset, energized by the recently concluded India-EU Free Trade Agreement. India and Italy are increasingly aligned on defense, energy, the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, known as IMEC, Indo-Pacific cooperation, and the strategic connection between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean. Italy is no longer just a European partner for India. It is becoming part of India's larger Indo-Mediterranean strategy, a vision that sees the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea, the Red Sea, and the Mediterranean as a connected strategic space. The May 5 Nation Tour did not happen in isolation. It was the continuation of a diplomatic year that had already produced several major moments. On February 25, 2026, Prime Minister Modi arrived in Israel for a 2-day state visit. What happened on the first day made history. Modi became the first Indian Prime Minister to address the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. At a special plenary session of the 120-member parliament, Modi delivered a speech that was applauded multiple times by Israeli lawmakers. He spoke of shared democratic values, civilizational bonds, and the common fight against terrorism. He received a standing ovation, and he was awarded the Speaker of the Knesset Medal, the Israeli parliament's highest honor. The visit produced 27 bilateral outcomes. India and Israel signed 16 agreements and announced 11 joint initiatives spanning critical and emerging technologies, labor mobility, agriculture, culture, and education. The two sides elevated their existing strategic partnership to a special strategic partnership. Joint initiatives included a collaboration in critical and emerging technologies to be led by both countries' national security advisors and an Indo-Israel Cyber Center of Excellence to be established in India. Modi's words at the Knesset were unambiguous. India stands with Israel firmly, with full conviction, in this moment and beyond. The visit reflected how far India-Israel relations have traveled. India recognized Israel in 1950, but kept diplomatic relations at a distance for decades, shaped by Cold War politics and concerns about the Arab world's reaction. Full diplomatic ties were established only in 1992. Modi's 2017 visit to Israel was the first ever by an Indian prime minister. The 2026 Knesset address was the next chapter. It should be noted that Modi's position on Israel has attracted criticism, including from India's own opposition, who felt the prime minister was too closely aligned with the Israeli government and insufficiently vocal about civilian casualties in Gaza. This is a legitimate debate within Indian public life, and it reflects the complexity of India's positioning in a deeply fractured geopolitical landscape. But on the question of security cooperation, technology access, and defense partnership, the Israel relationship has delivered significant practical value for India over the years. The diplomatic relationship between India and Canada spent much of 2023 and 2024 in crisis. The assassination of Sikh activist Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Canada in 2023, and former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's subsequent public accusation that Indian agents were involved, triggered one of the worst diplomatic ruptures in the modern history of India-Canada ties. Diplomats were expelled on both sides. But 2026 brought a different chapter. Mark Carney took over as Prime Minister of Canada, and a deliberate, careful reset began. On March 2, 2026, Carney made his first visit to India, the first bilateral visit by a Canadian Prime Minister to India since 2018. He was accompanied by senior ministers, provincial leaders, and leading business executives. What the two leaders announced was described as a new partnership. India and Canada set a target to more than double bilateral trade to $70 billion by 2030. A comprehensive economic partnership agreement, effectively a free trade deal, was committed to with the goal of signing it by December 2026. A memorandum of understanding on clean energy cooperation was signed, covering solar, wind, bioenergy, and small hydropower. A $2.6 billion 10-year deal for Canadian uranium was agreed, a direct support for India's nuclear energy ambitions. Modi himself captured the pace of the change. Prime Minister Carney has not even completed 1 year in office, yet our relations have leapt forward by a light year. Canada wants new markets, India needs uranium, LNG, and critical minerals. Both want to reduce dependence on an unpredictable United States. Diplomacy, as always, is driven by interest. And interest, when mutual, has a way of overcoming even the most bitter of disputes. To understand what India is gaining, you need to understand the philosophy behind Modi's diplomatic approach. This is how India's long game works. First, energy security. India imports most of its oil. So every war, every sanction, every blocked sea route becomes an Indian problem. That is why Modi's diplomacy has not depended on one country, one region, or one supplier. The Gulf gives India oil and strategic access. Norway brings offshore energy and clean technology. Canada brings uranium and LNG possibilities. The United States brings scale and global influence. India is not waiting for an energy crisis to arrive. It is building escape routes before the crisis begins. Second, technology access. India wants to become a technology power, but no major power rises alone. Sweden for AI and quantum, the Netherlands for semiconductors and infrastructure, Norway for clean technology, Israel for defense and cybersecurity. These are not symbolic partnerships. They are the building blocks of India's next industrial leap. Third, strategic depth. India is no longer looking only at its neighborhood or the Gulf. It is entering the Nordics. It is deepening Europe. It is building relationships with countries that may be small in size, but massive in technology, capital, maritime power, and global influence. That is leverage. And then comes something even deeper: heritage as diplomacy. Since 2014, more than 1,400 Indian antiquities have returned home. Ancient sculptures, bronze idols, temple artifacts, historical documents. Piece by piece, India is bringing back its stolen memory. The Chola Copper Plates are not just old metal records. They are proof of a civilization that built empires, governed oceans, and shaped history long before the modern world understood power. And when they return after centuries, it sends a message. India is not only reclaiming markets. India is not only reclaiming technology. India is reclaiming its story. That is why this diplomacy matters. It is not random travel. It is energy, technology, strategy, and civilizational memory, all moving together. Let us step back and look at what the last few months have actually produced in concrete terms. From the UAE visit, an MOU to store up to 30 million barrels of crude in India's strategic reserves, an LPG supply agreement with ADNOC, India's largest single LPG supplier, a strategic defense partnership framework, and $5 billion in investment commitments from the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority. From the Netherlands visit, 17 bilateral agreements, the return of the 11th century Chola Copper Plates, and new engagement in semiconductors, green hydrogen, and defense. From Sweden, elevation to strategic partnership, the Joint Action Plan 2026 to 2030, Joint Innovation Partnership 2.0, an India-Sweden AI corridor, and a goal to double bilateral trade in 5 years. From Norway, the first Indian PM visit in 43 years, the third India-Nordic Summit, new agreements on clean technology, blue economy, maritime cooperation, and trade built on the recently entered into force India-EFTA agreement. From Israel, February 2026, the first ever address by an Indian PM to the Knesset, elevation to special strategic partnership, 16 agreements and 11 joint initiatives, an Indo-Israel Cyber Center of Excellence, and cooperation in critical technologies led by national security advisors. From Canada, March 2026, a commitment to double trade to $70 billion by 2030, a free trade agreement to be signed by December 2026, a $2.6 billion uranium deal, a clean energy MOU, and the most intensive India-Canada diplomatic engagement in decades. That is energy security, technology partnerships, defense frameworks, heritage returns, trade ambition, investment capital, and strategic access to the Nordics, Europe, the Gulf, and North America. All of it in under 6 months. There is a reason the phrase Mr. International has taken hold among Modi's supporters. It is not just about the frequency of visits. It is about the accumulation of outcomes that those visits are producing. For an older generation of Indians, there is a particular weight to moments like these. India spent much of the post-independence era positioning itself as a leader of the non-aligned movement. Important, respected, but often reactive. India's size and civilizational depth were acknowledged, but its economic and strategic weight were limited. It was heard in rooms but did not always set the agenda. That has changed. When Modi addresses the Knesset, the first Indian Prime Minister to do so, it is not just a diplomatic milestone. It is a statement that India's relationship with Israel, long managed cautiously from a distance, has matured into something different. When the Chola Copper Plates come home from a university in the Netherlands, it is not just a cultural event. It is the world acknowledging in a concrete and irreversible way that India's civilizational inheritance has value and that it belongs to India. When Canada, after one of the most damaging diplomatic ruptures in recent memory, sends its prime minister to New Delhi with a delegation of ministers and CEOs and signs deals worth billions, it is a signal that the world cannot afford to be estranged from India for long. When Sweden elevates its relationship with India to a strategic partnership and launches an AI corridor, it is Europe saying that India is not just a market, but a genuine technology peer. When Norway receives an Indian prime minister for the first time in 43 years, it is the Arctic and the Nordic world saying, "We want you here." None of this means that every challenge is solved. India faces real diplomatic complexity on the Israel-Palestine question, on the still fragile India-Canada relationship, on the management of ties with China, on the unpredictability of an American transition. Diplomacy is not the absence of difficulty. It is the management of it in pursuit of national interest. But what Indians are seeing in 2026 is a country that has built enough trust with enough partners that it can show up in a crisis, like the Strait of Hormuz disruption, and come away with agreements that protect its energy supply. A country that can walk into the European Union's most technologically advanced nations and come away with AI corridors and quantum partnerships and joint innovation centers. A country that can ask for its heritage back and get it. There is a final point worth making directly, because it gets to the heart of the debate about Modi's foreign travel. Diplomacy is not a transaction, it is a relationship, and relationships require presence, continuity, and the kind of trust that only personal engagement can build. When Modi visits the UAE year after year, building a relationship with President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan that both leaders publicly describe in terms of personal friendship, he is not just attending meetings, he is creating a context in which, when India needs something urgently, like energy security during a regional war, the UAE says yes. When he visits the Nordic countries, places that many Indian diplomatic missions had treated as secondary priorities for decades, he is opening doors that, once opened, create their own momentum. Business follows political trust. Technology partnerships follow business. Strategic cooperation follows technology partnerships. The critics who said the visits were about optics were not entirely wrong. Optics matter in diplomacy too. But they miss the deeper point. The visits are the investment. The agreements are the return. And in 2026, the returns are coming in. There is a phrase that has become common in discussions of India's foreign policy in recent years. India is no longer asking for its seat at the table. It is pulling up a chair. The events of 2026 give that phrase real content. This is not one story. It is many stories, but they all point in the same direction. A country building, patiently, systematically, and with growing confidence, the relationships that will define its place in the world for the next generation. Energy deals strengthen the future. Heritage restores the soul. Strategic partnerships build the architecture of power, and together they tell one story. India is rising, not with noise, but with outcomes. Thank you to everyone watching, supporting, sharing, and being part of these conversations. It genuinely means a lot.